Okay, hopefully there's no echo because my earbuds are not connected and it doesn't look, I'm not sure if people are watching yet, but I'm going to start because that's how VODs work. Yeah, it doesn't look like anybody's here yet, but I'm going to just start moving into it just because VODs are a thing. Actually, while we get people getting on, I'm going to try to see if I can fix my audio for a bit. Okay, there you go. I think it's working now. Secret surprise. Yeah, maybe. Depends if people want it. We'll see. Let's see if this works real quick. Let me just. Okay, it doesn't work, but. Oops. That was whoopsies. Okay, so. Not gonna lie, I was kind of hoping Bex would be here because I feel like this would be useful. Any other classman, this would be a useful stream. But because this is a VOD, we need to get started. So, I guess I should skip the formalities unless there are, because it doesn't look like there's people in here. But yeah, if you're watching this VOD, hopefully you went to the Right for Rights event. If not, you missed out, first of all. But you should try to come to our future events because they're really fun, especially when we collab with other clubs. You get to meet new people. And also make sure to follow us on Twitch because we still have the OG hoodie going away, giveaway going on. And once we hit our 50 followers, we're going to give that away. Yes, but we missed out. Pretty sad, man. You should have went. I guess band is also a thing. Kind of sucks that things are right after school and band is also right after school. But to get started, today we're talking about extracurriculars, specifically how they sort of pertain to college apps. So like what they are, basically what they're looking for in extracurriculars as opposed to just having a list. And remember, if you guys have any questions, it doesn't seem like there's anybody here, but if you guys have questions, then make sure to ask them because that's the best way for you to develop an understanding and for me to make sure, like to try to make myself more clear, to see where I'm also being unclear. So just a reminder that I'm a junior. I don't have any, and I'm not like part of the college admissions process. So there are a lot of things that I could be saying that are wrong. This is all based off of my own research and some of my own thinking. And something like, it's not just that I have just been researching and that's it. I've also like realized how this research can actually help me a lot and how my extracurriculars are actually pretty weak. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I guess the first question is, what do colleges actually want? And this is just going to be all focused from an academic perspective, more so like if you're looking from like the athletics scholarship or like let's say something more artistic, this is not so much it because that's more of a sort of case by case scenario as opposed to something that we can generally apply to large groups of people. So this will be coming more from an academic perspective. And a lot of people have an idea of what colleges really want in those in students, but they don't actually know why the colleges want those traits, and that sort of gives them a slightly flawed view of what colleges actually want. So what we're going to do is view college from a business model standpoint, because what that allows us to do is to focus on the real needs of the colleges and why, and because a lot of their needs come from basically their need for money. So generally speaking, whether colleges actively pursue money, or if they already have large endowments, they still need money from tuition because of the high cost of administration in colleges, high overhead. So public schools, sure, they get state funding, but at the same time, they still get a lot from tuition. If you think about it, like for the out-of-state students, that's a ridiculous amount of money. Taxes cover a good amount, but still. And for like private schools, basically all of their money. Like a statistic found that like 89% of private university revenue is just from tuition. So their main funding is coming from tuition, which means that they rely on the tuition of students. More importantly, they rely on having students who can pay them in order for their sort of entity to survive. And since that's the case, and the fact that we have a sort of like in society, we have a pretty regular and stable demand for college education, and it's pretty high. The goal of colleges, there it's twofold. So you have one goal for colleges is to sort of attract students into their school. So if you think about like a business, they need to first attract those customers, and then they need to keep, because college is like a service, right? You pay for 4 years. It's not just a one-time purchase really, because you can transfer out. The goal of the colleges after they attract their students is to keep their students. So, and the fact that colleges need to attract students is reflected by the fact that literally college advertising, just colleges advertising their own like university, that industry is $2 billion a year. Maybe not per year, but it's $2 billion. And like, sure, the fact that like it might sound like not a lot because it's you just hear 2 billion and you don't really recognize how much $1 billion is. But $2 billion is an enormous amount just to spend on advertising for something that you would traditionally not consider to be something to be advertised. Like usually you wouldn't think of a university to be advertising. That's not the type of thing you would think of. But it's literally $2 billion, I think, per year. So with that huge statistic in mind, we should sort of look at what is it that attracts students to a college, right? Generally speaking, a consumer will choose a service, because this is a service, if it has high value and for a like a reasonably low cost. And because the demand for college is pretty high and it's constant, the price is also going to be very high, which is kind of reflected in like a 4 year education. It's literally at tens of thousands of dollars, and most college students go into debt. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, looks like we have a lot more viewers now. If you guys ever have any questions, make sure you guys ask them. Okay. So are there any questions right now before I move on? That I feel like this is an important foundational part to get. Just to summarize, I guess, before we move on. Basically, we can look at colleges and why they look for things in students based on a more business model approach, which is that colleges need tuition in order for themselves to survive. And since students have to pay tuition, college's main goals are to attract students and to keep students. And of course, this doesn't consider the fact that like teachers want to teach students. Like this doesn't take into account the whole human side of things. But at the same time, there is like you have to consider that money is part of the decision when it comes to like schools. Okay, I think I've given enough time to ask questions. Remember that if you guys ever have any questions at any point, just ask them. Okay. So yeah. So I guess one important part of businesses is the idea of differentiation, which is that why should customers or consumers choose your service as opposed to other services? So in this case, why choose one college over another? And of course, that's something that students have a lot of trouble with. But let's sort of look at the different factors that sort of determine whether a student will choose a school or not choose a school. So the first one, this is the most common one. Well, maybe not the most common one, but this is one of the biggest ones, and that is prestige, right? Like when you think about what schools people are applying to, they're applying to the most well-known schools. So like all of the UCs, for instance, we're here in California, all of the UCs, the CSUs, and then the Ivy Leagues, and some of the big privates that aren't Ivy League, like Stanford, MIT, Vanderbilt, like that type of stuff. So if we want to sort of understand what prestige means, we have to sort of look at what it is that makes a college prestigious. So if you look at all of the prestigious sort of universities, the things that sort of make them prestigious there's two main parts. One of them is that they have students who are extremely high profile, which means like, for example, if a college has alumni that are extremely famous, and then like let's say like there's a news article and it's like, oh, Harvard researcher finds, or not Harvard researcher, I see like Harvard alumnus finds this thing. That sort of adds to the prestige of a college. And there's also like the pre-existing reputation, but that's sort of hard to sort of encapsulate, and it's not very useful for our purposes, so we're just going to sort of push that aside. But the second thing is more from a research standpoint. How good is their, like, how good are their researchers, and how many academic breakthroughs or like scientific or even just general breakthroughs do they have? Because in addition to having the student side, they also, a lot of colleges, especially their professors, they're based on their research like capabilities. So what we've sort of, so like there are two parts of prestige right there, right? And so both of those things will attract students. So how does a college get these things? Because that's pretty important, right? So for a student to become high profile, or to have alumni that will be high profile, those students have to have some certain traits, right? not just anybody can become a high profile person. Like you can't just become Elon Musk. There are certain factors or certain things that can lead you to have a higher chance of being a high profile. We're calling it high profile person. So the main thing is that these people who are so high profile, they have to be exceptional in a unique way. So that's very important. Not only is the way that they are like good, the thing that they're good at unique, they also must be very, very like top of their field in it. So the main things, these are going to sound somewhat familiar. It's going to be notable leadership, extreme academic success, because that leads to breakthroughs in research, powerful drive or commitment, because that is the things that bring change in the world, a fierce work ethic, which is sort of the same thing as drive and commitment, except work ethic is sort of the idea that you can implement that drive and commitment, whereas drive is more so that passion. And those are the main four things I would say. And when you look at those four traits, you sort of notice, wait, these are the things that colleges look for. They look for like, oh, do you have extracurriculars where you're a leader? Are you doing super well in school? Do you have these outside hobbies or projects where you put everything into it? And finally, are you working hard on the things that you love? So then it starts to sort of connect why it is that colleges look for these leaders, these academically successful people, these people who are super driven, and these people who work really hard. It's because those people are more likely to become successful and therefore more likely to increase the prestige of that college, which means that thereby they can attract even more students and thereby gain more like tuition. And it sounds really bad that these colleges are just like, oh, all we want is your money. And that's not the case. It's just that it is necessary for them to have money for them to survive. So this is sort of like a necessity basis. And then above that, and sort of like if you abstract away from that, there's also this more human layer of like, oh, is this person like a good person? Like there's that human side, there's also that economic side. And we're looking more from the economic side because it's a more fundamental reason, like for more fundamental understanding. That's not to say that college admissions officers are heartless and all they do is look at statistics and stuff, but it is to say that there are certain things that colleges are looking for, and we can sort of understand this through an economic viewpoint. Does that make sense so far? I feel like that was sort of an important keystone. So if there are any questions, now would be a great time. All right. Seems like there aren't any questions yet. So other things are like another thing that can attract a student to the college is lower tuition or a faster track to achieving the credential they want. Because a lot of students, like most students, not students, I guess most people will be applying to college basically for the degree so that they can put it on their resume. Obviously, the education is important, but for the most part, colleges are pretty like they've got the education part down. It's more about the degree from the prestigious place. But getting that degree faster or lower tuition, which sort of are connected because the less time it takes to get that credential, the less amount of less money you have to pay for because you're coming for less time. But the reason why this is not actually a big one is because this for you to have lower tuition, it requires that you have lower overhead or you make a lot more money. And by the way, overhead just means that you have lower costs that you have to pay like frequently. So like let's say if you have like lower like you pay your professors lower tenor like wages or like you just spend overall less money like per like let's say unit of time. So like instead of spending like $2 million a year on paying professors, you just spend like 200,000, and that way you can have a lower tuition because you're paying your people less. But usually this is pretty rare because there's already such a high demand for education. Why make it cheaper when they're willing to pay more, right? Like you're just losing money that you would get, like you could get. So usually it's pretty rare for you to have low tuition or to like have a super short um path. Although like the idea of like boot camps, like coding boot camps or like speed runs or not speed runs, but like just like learning faster. That's sort of a new thing. But for the most part, colleges don't really have this idea of lower tuition or a fast track. So the next thing is sort of living conditions. I sort of just like it's like it's more of an umbrella term. But like when you think of like the big best colleges, in addition to that prestige, they also have all of this money that they use on making the dorms nice, making the cafeterias nice, making the campus nice, making the area safe. And it's just those are just more quality of life things that come from college making more money. And fundamentally, where does that money come from? It comes from having students. And where do the students where are the students coming from, or why are the students coming to the school? Because they're attracted, usually because of the high prestige. generally speaking, high prestige will be the main reason why a student comes to a certain school. But there are also other things, and we're going to have two more, I think. So the next thing that we have is the level of involvement by the students with sort of society. And that sounds kind of like abstract and like weird, but basically what it means is that the university is sort of like the students at the university are involved. So like it could be like fighting for like all the students fight for human rights. They start businesses. They do things, and it's not just like, oh, let me just study in my room until 2 a.m. and go to bed, wake up at 4, study again. Like they don't just have nerds. They have people who do things, and things get done at that college. And this again sort of adds is sort of like a subset of the prestige part, because you get more prestige when, let's say, a UC Berkeley college club raises $50,000 for homeless people, or like it's when you add that little university, like, oh, Harvard grad, or like Stanford alumni, like when you add that little university name at the beginning, it gives you that prestige. And when you have a high level of societal involvement, then you sort of have a higher chance of getting like that attention and then getting that prestige. And so I guess the next question is, how do colleges create this? How do they create this high level of societal involvement so that students are more likely to want to come to the school? And there are two main sort of facets to this. And one is that simply they have to create those opportunities. They can't be like draconian. Can't have like a draconian rules where you're not allowed to have a club that's involved with the community, or like you can't raise more than X amount of money without like basically they have to give the students the freedom to be able to do these things. But more importantly, they have to have students in the first place who are already highly involved. And how do you get that? You accept students who in high school have shown proof that they will be involved with your like with your campus or with society. Just on the whole, they will be adding to your college or the university by getting involved in society, and thereby you attract more students. And the way that you know that they will do this is because in high school they have proven that they would do that. So again, this all connects back to this prestige and how people will accept people who are leaders, people who are academically successful, people who are driven, people who work hard. And I guess another one is like people who are involved in the community in some way. So now we sort of get an idea of why colleges look for like these traits. And I guess we're just going to add this last one on just because it would be incomplete if I didn't include this. But one really big part of like the college search is sort of fit. The idea of like, do I fit in with the college? Like, are the people there like my type of people? Will I feel like I'm part of a community, or will I feel like I'm left out? And there are sort of like a couple of different types of communities. So one is like very like academically intensive, I would call them. They're the type of people who don't mind spending a lot of time on academic subjects, and they'll like research things. And these are the people who will contribute to the college's prestige by like making like research, like scientific or just in general breakthroughs, again, like I said before. And again, this adds to the prestige. And I guess in addition to that more intellectual side, you have this leadership. So if you have students in the community, like students in that college community who are leaders, you're going to attract leaders and also attract people, like even if they're not leaders, they'll attract followers, like people who are followers. Not necessarily that following is a bad thing, but that those leaders will attract both types of people, other leaders who want to learn from them and followers who look up to these people. And before I go on a tangent, so going back to the intellectually advanced students, how do we know that these students are intellectually advanced and that they will contribute to our, let's say, research like sort of aspect? We like colleges will know that these students that they accept will help them academically, like help them like with research, because in high school they have proven that they can get good grades and good test scores. And because they got good grades and good test scores, they have a track record of doing well in academic subjects, which means that they are more likely to do well in college, which means that they are more likely to contribute to the university's research capabilities. And the same thing with leadership. How do they know that the people they're accepting will be leaders and attract other students in the future? Because in high school they held leadership positions. They were leaders in society, like in their school, on their campus, in their community, in society. Because colleges have seen this, they have like this. They can see like on the application that these students have these leadership positions, they know that these students at the very least have some experience leading, and they also have a higher chance of being leaders once they arrive on the college campus. And there are basically three more, although the third one's a little bit more vague. So a third one is the idea of entrepreneurial students. And usually when you think about entrepreneurial college, there's a lot of like conflict between them. Like, oh, a lot of entrepreneurs nowadays say like college, oh, it's not even useful anymore. You don't need college. And I think to some degree, some cases it's true. But there are also these people who want like an education, but are by nature more entrepreneurial. And the way that colleges like okay, first of all, the reason why entrepreneurial students are like an entrepreneurial community is desired is because a lot of the time the hardest part about entrepreneurship, maybe it's not the hardest, but like a huge part is sort of the mental idea of being alone in your startup, and you're sort of just the only one doing this thing and you have to forge ahead alone. And the idea of having a community of entrepreneurs sort of creates this idea of solidarity, that you're in this together, and maybe you're all like maybe it's all tough, but at least you're all doing it together. And how do you know, like, how do colleges know whether the students they accept will be entrepreneurs and invite, like, attract other entrepreneurs to the university? It's because in high school they showed that they showed proof that they were entrepreneurial and that they wanted to start organization or business, right? And I said, okay, now going on to the final two, the last main category would be artists. So this is a little bit more rare, just because universities tend to be more research driven, and also tend like artists usually like will not. It's not as common for artists to get their main sort of practice or experience in college, but artists are also a big community. Not necessarily just like visual art, but also performing arts. Also like what's it called? Like music. I forgot that word was, but like art, having a community of artists who have sort of performed at the highest level sort of creates this community, that and this idea that this university has a rich culture, and that you want to be a part of this rich culture. And then the question becomes, how do universities make themselves more, like, have a more artistic community? And that's by accepting people who have sort of shown in their high school like sort of career, I guess, in their high school careers, that they are artistically inclined, and that they have proof that they are artistically inclined. Specifically, that not only do they do art stuff in their free time, but they have won awards. So for instance, like playing in Carnegie Hall, or like winning awards for the music or art that they create or perform. And the fifth category is just generally high performing people, which means that they do like this overall do well in school, they do well in extracurriculars, they have all these things, just not to the same extreme that maybe other students have. They just have like what you would call a well-rounded profile. And we'll get into the well-rounded part afterwards. And that was kind of a lot. Are there any questions? It's not the same without Bex, is it? Okay. So, okay, I guess I forgot this one. There's one last thing that sort of invites or attracts students to a university. And this probably should be the most obvious one, which is a good education, right? You want to go to that university to receive an education, to receive a credential for that education, so that you can go to a job or company, and you can show that, hey, I've been educated in this thing. I can, like, this is proof that I have the knowledge necessary to properly perform at this job. And so, how do colleges provide a good education? That comes from having good professors, good facilities, good staff. That's basically it. And how do you get good professors, good facilities, good staff? This comes from either having money or from having prestige. How do you get money? From attracting students who will make you attract other students so that you make more money. We've already talked about this a lot. But the second thing is also prestige, which we've also talked about. But the reason why prestige helps you have better education is because it attracts better colleges. I'm not sorry, it attracts better professors. Because if this prestige is more on the research or academic side, but if you have high research or academic prestige, these professors are more likely to want to go to your university. The same reason that, like, oh, every single like software engineer wants to work at FANG, because those are the established companies who have who are basically the leaders in the field of tech in this case. And at the same in this case in college, it's like the most prestigious universities or like academically are the ones that professors are going to want to go to. So, are there any questions on that before I sort of wrap up the sort of things that differentiate colleges and why maybe somebody would choose to go to one college over another? I'm sort of blasting through this right now. Okay, doesn't seem like there's any questions. Okay, so just to sort of summarize, the conclusion is that colleges accept students that can perform highly so that the college can be more attractive to other students. And then every student that they attract who is also a high performing student, or like basically they're an attractive student who will attract other students. So every student that they attract like successfully and they like attract the correct student, so that student will attract more students, and if those students are the right types of people, they'll attract more students, and basically you have a positive feedback loop that keeps bringing in money to the school. So that is why sort of colleges want these driven leaders who are academically successful and can like work hard and prove can like have proof that they can. That sort of gives the overview of what colleges want. I'm going to be moving on into how colleges keep students, but I want to make sure that there are not any questions about how colleges attract students in the first place. So I'm just going to give maybe a couple of seconds for any questions. Okay, seems like there's no questions about how colleges attract students. But now we're moving on to how colleges keep students, which is going to be important because, again, it's important to their business model to make money. So, yeah. So, how colleges keep students is an important question to ask because obviously it's how they make money. But it's like, sorry, I'm having trouble wording this. What colleges need to figure out is how to prevent students from dropping out from their college. Because if students drop out, then they can't pay the tuition. Or if another thing that colleges need to look out for is like a lot of students will have to take loans in order to pay for college. And something really important, I'm not sure exactly how this works, but I think it could be that colleges need to make sure that the students become successful enough after college in order to pay back their loans. And actually, now I'm thinking about this, that's probably not valid because I think they use the loans they pay immediately and then they have to pay the banks later. So my bad preparation. But the number one thing is how do we stop students from dropping out? Because that's tens of thousands of dollars we're losing every single time a student drops out. So if you think about it, we're the students. What would make us drop out from a college? Anybody have an idea? Okay, it doesn't seem like anybody is responding. But I would say that the main thing, other than maybe a lack of fit or community, which is a little bit harder to fix, but I think the main thing is having bad grades or fearing that you will fail out of college. So like if you have just straight F's or D's or C's even in college, you're more likely to feel like this school is just not like it's just too hard for you. And especially when you compare yourself to your peers, if your peers are doing very well and you're doing very bad, you're more willing to drop out and just go to like let's say a community college near your home. So what colleges need to do is make sure that like students don't have bad grades or don't fear that they'll fail and drop out. And there are a couple of solutions to this, but only one really makes sense. So the first solution is colleges can spend a lot of money, like probably in the millions, hundreds of millions, training their students to become, let's say, like mentally stable, to become like more healthy, to become more academically sort of successful, like teaching them how to do well in college. But that in itself costs a lot of money, even though this is something that colleges are starting to move towards. But it's this is like sort of one option that sorry, I'm sort of moving to that. But one thing that colleges can do is spend a lot of money trying to train those students to be better students. But because that costs so much money, it's unlikely for colleges to do it, even though some colleges are moving in that direction. Another thing they can do is make the curriculum easier so that students are less likely to fail and that they're less likely to fear failing, and then thereby they're less likely to want to drop out. The problem with that is that it ruins their prestige, and we've already talked a lot about how prestige is important to attracting future students. So just because of that, that's sort of off the table. The final thing is the thing that is the most common, which is that they just simply reject all the students who are probably going to fail out. They only accept the students who have proven that they're academically inclined and that they're willing to work hard for their grades. So there's some argument that, wait, if you're losing some people, then isn't that bad? You're losing out on money. But the problem is that not if you're accepting all these students who drop out, not only is that bad for, like, let's say your bottom line, but it's also bad for your reputation, because sure, you sort of build up this reputation of being a really hard and prestigious college. But the problem is that because they're all dropping out, it sort of makes these um basically you're inflating your acceptance rate for no reason because they're dropping out anyway. And when you present yourself as a more selective college, i.e. most private schools and the big UCs, when you make yourself more selective, you make yourself more prestigious, because, like, oh, if I can get into that school, I'm so good, right? That's what, like, students think. But the problem with, so that's like the problem with just accepting everybody. But if, like, when colleges look at your grades and they see somebody who, let's say, freshman year had bad grades, but then you can see the upward trajectory of their grades, and then in senior year, or like first semester of senior year and throughout junior year, you have all A's. It shows that you are willing to work hard for your grades and that you can work for your grades. So that sort of like points out why it is that colleges look for good grades. It's because the people who had good grades in high school and worked for those grades are more likely to do well in college, because they've had this experience and they prove to the college that they can work for good grades and that they can get good grades, because that means that they won't drop out, which means that the colleges won't be losing out on potential tuition money. Does that make sense? Hopefully. If there's any questions, again, please ask. Okay, just again, sort of summarize. Colleges are looking for those who are academically inclined and can get good grades, because not only are they more likely to do well in college, which means that they aren't going to drop out, but it also brings to them prestige, because they're more likely to sort of, let's say, have a research breakthrough, develop the COVID-19 vaccine, something like that. Kind of like how Oxford developed their own vaccine. That added to their prestige. They also look for leaders, because the leaders will attract other leaders, and leaders also tend to be more involved in society, which again attracts more people, because they want to sort of, a lot of people envision themselves, not necessarily that it's bad or good or anything, but a lot of people envision themselves as people who help out society, as people who are involved in the society and make a difference. And when colleges have all this community of students who are all involved with the community and they're all leaders, it attracts these people to their school, which means that they get in more tuition money. In addition to academics and leadership, you also have people, and also people who get involved. You also have just in general passion and commitment, because those are the people who are willing to work through everything and are more willing to become high-profile alumni. Hopefully that all makes sense. Again, if there are any questions, please ask. Okay, so now, given all of this understanding that we've developed of why it is that colleges want specific things and what those things are, we can sort of look into the college applications process in terms of grades and academics, or grades and extracurriculars. So the first thing is that in the college admissions process, there's this thing called the ref cut, and there's this thing called the fine sort. So because the demand is so high for universities and colleges, and the colleges only have a pretty small team to go through thousands of applications, because if they had a big team, they'd have to pay more people, which means that they lose out on potential money that they could be profiting from. So they have a small group of people who have to look at thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of applications. What a lot of schools have now is an algorithm that takes into account all of your academic factors, GPA, AP classes taken out of all the ones that are offered at your school, your class rank, your SAT, your ACT, your PSAT, your AP scores. You take all of that and then you spit out some index or rank. Rank, and by the way, rank is relative to the other applicants. So they sort of they sort of weight like, oh, GPA is like 30% of what you get in, and AP scores are like 20%. And it's just like, that's not necessarily it, but they have an algorithm that spits out an index or rank that sort of positions you relative to the other applicants. And for the more selective colleges, if you fall below that threshold, you're just cut out. You're just automatically rejected because you just don't meet the academic requirements. And if we look back and we look at the things that sort of that attract students and what colleges look for in students, this makes sense because these students are probably not going to survive at the college, or if they do, they're not going to add to the academic sort of prestige. Some of the less selective colleges will accept solely on an academic basis, which means that if you're above some threshold in terms of your academic index or rank that comes out of that algorithm, you're just automatically accepted. Like I heard, like University of Alabama, if you have above a certain ACT score, you get accepted in no matter what. So that's sort of the rough cut, which is sort of you take in all of these grades, you take in all of your academic stuff, and it spits out, and then you get cut off if you're too low. If you're above it, you make it on to the next step, which is the fine sort. What we can sort of gather from this is that grades are just the first step. They get you in the door, but they don't get you in, depending on the college, obviously. So everybody knows, after the rough cut, you have this fine sort, and this is sort of looking more at who you are as a person. That's the holistic part of what colleges say they do. So everybody knows about the idea of like being well-rounded, but at this point, it's so common that everybody looks at basically the same. Like they have decent, maybe solid grades. They have some volunteering efforts, like they're part of WAVE, they're part of Key Club, they're part of G-Wins. They volunteer. Maybe they have like 1 or 2 leadership positions in some small clubs, or maybe even like a big club. And then they have some sport, or maybe marching band or something like that, right? The pretty like generic college profile. And I would say that would be me. Like I basically encapsulate all of that plus a little more, because I have solid grades. I would say I have some pretty solid grades. My test scores are pretty solid. I have a couple of leadership positions in minor clubs. Like sure, I'm president, but it's a small club. I have some activity in a sport. I volunteer occasionally for like Key Club and maybe some others. I have a small blog writing extracurricular and a remote like low participation internship. Right? Those are all it's like a long list of just mediocre things. I have grades. I have test scores. I have a small position. I have sport. I have volunteering. And that's sort of the generic profile. But there was this famous talk by I think some Harvard grad or even Harvard student. I'm not sure. There's this talk about having something called the spike, which is essentially some part of your extracurriculars that's just extremely impressive and noteworthy, and everything else is well-rounded. So you can just sort of imagine like if you have, let's say, like you have like straight A's, that's solid. You have maybe 3s, 4s, and 5s on your APs exams. You have solid SAT if that's something they have, and then you have like let's say in your sports your top 10 in the country for let's say I don't know badminton, right? If you're like top tier in something, then that's your spike. And what spikes allow you to do is that they make you stand out. And I think the prime example of this would be, as far as I can tell, obviously I'm an outsider and I haven't really talked to her, but is Mika. Mika is insanely good at tennis. She travels to compete, and she's also doing solid in school. She's part of an extracurricular called Second Serve, I'm pretty sure. She has this foundation to talk about how tennis has driven her. So she has all this well-rounded stuff. She has grades, she has some extracurriculars, she has volunteering. And then she has this huge spike in tennis where she got second in CIF semifinals. It's just like, you got this well-rounded profile and you have a huge spike that makes you stand out. So if you're a junior, or even if you're just a high schooler in general, it's kind of hard to develop a spike if you haven't already. Because the problem with a spike is that it usually takes years to develop that spike. Mika's probably been playing tennis for like years upon years. And it's really hard to just develop that spike on the spot. Like if you just like if I suddenly decided I'm gonna become a chess GM and I'm gonna go to Harvard because I'm so good at chess. I can't just become a GM in like a year. Even though a year sounds like a long time, it's not enough to develop to become something that is truly noteworthy. But even though that sounds like you're just screwed because now you're just like every single other generic person who's in like band and has grades and volunteers, there's another path, which is it's a little bit more common, but it's also a lot more, it's not more defining than having a spike, but it's easier to attain. And it's the idea of having something called juxtapositional spikes, which is basically just having like multiple spikes that are smaller. So they're still noteworthy. They sort of display your character still, but you're not necessarily like you're not just one thing and you're super good at one thing, and you're also not just a well-rounded person who just has like a well-rounded profile we've talked about. So, for instance, this could be something like you are the team captain of the USA Biology Olympiads. You've got this pretty decent spike. Maybe your team makes it past the county, but you make second in state. So like you're not on the national scene, you're not traveling to compete like Mika, but you're pretty decent, right? You're pretty good. Like to make it to the state and make second, you gotta be pretty good at biology. So that's sort of your first mini spike. And then let's say you are the team captain of academic world class, and then you make it to nationals. You don't get anywhere nationals. You get eliminated first round, but you make it to nationals. That's another mini spike. And this is where the juxtaposition part comes in, because academic world quest is a foreign policy competition. Biology Olympiad is a science competition. These are two different spikes that are juxtaposed with each other, because usually when you look at it, foreign policy is not something you would normally relate to biology. But what having these two spikes allows you to do is to sort of juxtapose them and sort of show things about your character, because you have these dual interests of foreign policy and biology. And you can create a narrative out of this by talking about how biology or just advances in science in general have an effect on foreign policy. And you can sort of connect these two juxtapositional spikes into something that's more noteworthy and something that portrays more of your character, more of your drive, more of that passion that colleges want. Does that make sense? That's a little bit hard to grasp in my opinion. So if there are questions, please ask them. Okay. Seems like no questions like before. So we're starting to approach the end just because there aren't any questions. We should be wrapping up way before 7:30. So what we're going to get to now, as I get a drink of water first. What we're getting to now is the 4 tiers of extracurriculars, because what this sort of tier list allows you to do is rank your extracurriculars in a way that sort of allows you to look at, hey, this is what my college profile looks like, and do I need to fix these things? Do I need to get rid of some things? How should I adjust my profile so that I have spikes, or if I have a spike, or if I have mini spikes, if I have those juxtapositional spikes, or if I'm just well-rounded. Not to say that well-rounded is bad, it's just a little bit more generic. But here goes nothing. Okay, so there are 4 tiers of extracurriculars. Tier 1 is the highest, Tier 4 is the most generic. So having a Tier 1 extracurricular is the equivalent of having a single big spike. This would include things like nationally ranked in a sport, first place in a national competition, making it to internationals for a competition, attending a merit-based, like a high-quality merit-based summer program, not one we can pay to, or you like start a highly successful organization. Those are the things that sort of like, wow, this person is amazing. Something that is so rare that even the colleges is like, it's not that they haven't heard of it, but it's just extremely impressive to the college admissions officers. That's tier 1. Moving on to tier 2. Tier 2 is like the equivalent of tier 1, except it's a little bit more common and it's on a little bit of a smaller scale. So instead of being like first place in a national competition, let's say like your president, sorry, instead of being first place in a national competition, you get first place in states, or you make it like to like top, like, let's say like you make it to nationals, but you don't win, or you make like top 20 or something. Or if you're the president of a big club like Key Wins, Model UN, Key Club, Science Olympiad, or like you're regionally ranked, or like you play at the state level in your sport, but you're not like nationally ranked, or like you start an organization that's like sort of gained some traction, but it's not super big. It's not like something that is super impressive. It's not like you're making 20K a year, like from that's like 200K a year in revenue. That would be a tier two. A tier two is just a tier one, but it's a little bit smaller. And what I would argue a tier two to be is basically one of those mini spikes. Just one of those like team captain of academic requests, or like I don't know, first place in the state for biology Olympiad. So that's tier two. Moving on to tier three. Tier three, those activities, those extracurriculars demonstrate the student's efforts outside the classroom. But again, on a smaller scale, a little bit less impressive, a little bit more common. This is something like holding a minor position, like treasurer, secretary in a very established clubs. So this would be like treasurer of T Club, secretary of T Wins, I don't know, like uh, vice president of Model UN. Or it could be holding a major position in a minor club, which is like starting like being part of like chess club. And I would say that tier three is what I would consider most of my extracurriculars to be. I'm the president of two clubs, but they're small. Project Illuminate has 4 viewers right now, and most of them are bored. Or like chess club, we have a couple of members, but it's not very big. So I'm the president, but only of these small clubs. And let's say I'm on varsity tennis, but we like last year we didn't win regionals. Sure, we got pretty far, and this year we'll probably get even further. Maybe we'll win CIF. But my sort of like my personal ability is like not up to that level. So I would consider my tennis ability tier three. I'm the team captain of Academic World Quest, but it's not super huge, and we're not national. Like we don't win nationally. And I write for a small nonprofit, but it's a low time commitment thing. And I intern remotely at a startup, but again, low commitment. So most of my activities are tier three. Moving on to tier four. This is the most common, most accessible things. This is usually what you want to get started with freshman year. So this is things like just volunteering in general. This is like being a member of a bunch of clubs. This is participating in sports. Maybe you're in band, and maybe you get some awards, but it's nothing special. This is where like, oh, I volunteer for Wave, or like I do this. And the idea that these are tier four, it sounds like, oh, if I have like 1,000 service hours, that must be tier three, right? And sure, maybe you consider 1,000 hours to be tier three, but that's the equivalent of just being treasurer of a club. And you should sort of weigh the risk and like not the risk and benefits, but sort of the cons, the pros and cons. Would you rather spend 1,000 hours of your time doing service, or would you rather get the same results being treasurer of a club? Being treasurer of a club, you get leadership skills, you get more involved personally with things, and sure, the service part helps the community, but having a leadership position is more impressive at colleges because it shows that you have to do something. Like I heard about this story of like somebody who had 1,000 service hours, but the best school they made it into was UCR. Not UCR, not that UCR is bad in any way, but that just sort of goes to show it's not like a top tier UC. And 1,000 service hours sounds like a lot, but because it was all just on a membership level, it was not impressive enough to get into those good colleges. So just to sort of show how these tiers fit in. For community colleges, you can have 0 extracurriculars, your grades can be poop, you still get in. CSUs, I would say you can get in with solid grades, straight B's, straight C's. C's are a little bit iffy, but straight C's and some A's. That's good enough. Plus maybe a tier three and a couple of tier fours. So like, let's say you're varsity in a sport and then you just volunteer, you have good grades, CSU. For the UCs, I would say that it sort of diverges a little bit here because some UCs are a little bit easier to get into. I'd say like UC Berkeley, UCLA, those are the major ones. Those two are almost their own category. For UCs, for just it's not to be offensive, but the lower tiers of UCs, I would say maybe just a couple of tier threes, maybe one tier four, maybe like some tier fours, solid grades, B's, A's, that's good enough. For UCLA, UC Berkeley, they're basically in their own class. Those are the top public schools in the nation. For like UCLA, UC Berkeley, you probably want to have maybe a tier one, if that'd be ideal. You want to have basically straight A's. You want to have like tier one is ideal. Maybe 2 tier twos is good. You would have to have a lot of tier threes, and they'd have to be like not a lot of tier threes, but they have to be good tier threes. They can't just be like low end tier threes, like secretary of Cheat Club. But actually, no, sorry, that was really weird. But like just like they can't just be lazy tier threes. They have to be at least high end tier threes. And then for Ivy Leagues, you basically have to have a tier one, or you have to have multiple tier three twos that are just extremely impressive. So that's sort of the scale that I see and sort of how I sort of look at what extracurriculars are useful. So yeah, are there any questions? I'm gonna head to the restroom real quick while the questions come in, hopefully. Okay, doesn't look like there's any new questions. So that sort of marks the end of the sort of extracurricular section. We're going to be moving on to crafting the narrative part, which is pretty short. We're probably looking at maybe 5 minutes left. Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions. So crafting your narrative, once you have this understanding of the extracurriculars that we've developed over the course of the stream, it's a little bit easier to get an idea of what crafting a narrative really means. Because ultimately, colleges want to accept a person, not a list of accomplishments, because it is a person who will attract like a community of people, not a community of like accomplishments that will attract other students to help them cover their costs and to make profit. They want to have people who are leaders, like we've already talked about this, leaders, academically successful, driven, passion, work hard. And you want to be able to craft a narrative with your extracurriculars to demonstrate who you are to the colleges. Because if you just write down what you do, but it doesn't seem like you're even a person, it just seems like you're a robot who does stuff just to get into college, then it's a little bit like, it just feels like you're reading something like you're just reading a bullet pointed list. It just doesn't mean anything to the colleges, whereas you want to make something that matters. So to craft a narrative, you have to tie together your accomplishments. You have to like connect the dots. Like so you have like it's almost like you have all these dots. You have like this extracurricular, that extracurricular, these grades, this hobby. And crafting a narrative just means connecting the dots in a way that portrays you to the admissions officers. I think the first example of this I would say is Matthew Nguyen, our last guest on the stream. Last time Matthew Nguyen presented this persona. So he's the president of VSA, he's the president of Amnesty. VSA is sort of a Vietnamese culture club, I would consider it, and Amnesty is mainly a human rights service club. And he sort of merged together these two ideas of being a leader in the Viet community that fights for human rights and equality. And that sort of persona is backed up by the fact that he's the president of these two clubs. Sure, like being the president of VSA, being the president of Amnesty, I would say those are pretty like close to tier, like pretty low end tier 2 or pretty high end tier 3s right there. But when you connect those two together to create this persona of I am a leader, I want to be a leader in my Viet community, I want to bring the Viet community forward, and I want to fight for human rights. Like when you connect all these dots together, it starts to become not too high end tier 3s, but almost like you are like these tiers sort of just create a structure for you to to have an idea of how good your extracurriculars are. But when you connect them, it becomes less about tiers and more about who you become as a person in the eyes of the admissions officers. So I guess we should have an example. How do we craft a narrative, right? I think you should, this takes a little bit introspection. You can also always BS stuff because that's what people tend to do. But if you really want to do it right, you should sort of look at who you are and look at the stories and the patterns that make you who you are today. So for Matthew, it was leadership and fighting for what he believed. Maybe there's BS in there, maybe not. You can't tell. But on the outside, at the very least, it seems like that he has this story, this pattern of I want to lead the Viet community, I want to lead my culture, and I want to fight for what I think is right, which is that all humans deserve equal rights, equal and fair rights. And if you're a junior, you still have some time to build up these activities to present that narrative. And if you're even younger, if you're a freshman or sophomore, you have even more time to build up those patterns because sometimes it might be hard because sometimes pandemic sort of made things hard. It's kind of hard to craft a narrative when you haven't really done much. So at the very least, you should be able to try to like you should try to find out what it is you like, and like you should sort of get out there and figure out what it is that you want to do and what it is you want to be, so that you can have this idea, like these like extracurriculars to prove that this is what you like. And I think something that really like a timeline that I like is this one right here, which is sort of shows what it is that you should do. Like as a freshman, you should just join a bunch of clubs. Like it doesn't matter. Like you shouldn't pay the membership fee until you like for some clubs, unless you really want to join, and like until you want to join that, like, you know that you want to be part of that club. But just go out, join some clubs, do some stuff, participate in a bunch of different extracurriculars in school, out of school, organizations, volunteering. Like it can be anything. Just start doing stuff freshman year. Because a lot of time by freshman year, like most people will not have figured out what they want to do in life, and that's completely fine. You don't even need to figure out college, like because things always change. But at the very least, figure out what's fun to you, so that by the time you get to sophomore year, you can sort of like, hey, I have this whole list of stuff, but some of it I don't like as much as other stuff. So just cut off some clubs, identify where it is that you can sort of stand out, where you like what you're gonna like, and what you might be interested in sort of leading. And you can also consider doing what I did, which is that I started Project Illuminate because I sort of felt that there was a disconnect between, like, it felt like Marina didn't have this sort of academic community. And I think I sort of misinterpreted. I wasn't looking in the right places. But I started an organization because I felt like there was something missing. And I encourage everybody else to start organizations if they find anything else to be missing here. So that by the time you get to junior year, like what I did is that you pursue leadership in clubs and organizations, become president. So like I became president of chess club unintentionally, like weirdly enough. Like I started my own organization. I started looking at other opportunities for expanding organization, aka like collabing with the clubs, and we're probably looking to make some big projects to make it more clear what my interests are. In my senior year, next year, I want to just sort of aggregate all the opportunities I can get, and I maintain my positions, and then I can present to the college everything that I want to show them. So yeah, that's sort of a timeline of what you want to do if you want to build that college that narrative. That sort of wraps up everything that I in terms of direct extracurricular content. Was there anything that anybody wanted to ask? We're approaching about 1 hour now. Okay. I now I'm debating something. So as you can see in the title, there's the secret surprise. But it doesn't seem like anybody wants to, like there's any involvement, and also this is more of something that would be entertaining to do live as opposed to watching later. If anybody wants to see the secret surprise that's not on board, please let me know. If not, we're just basically gonna end it off here, end off with some final reminders and stuff. Okay, I think I'm just going to end with some final announcements and wrap it up. So, first thing is that recently, it's like this December, and this is the third stream I've had. Like, at the very beginning of the school year, we wanted streams to be monthly just because I thought they would take longer. In reality, they don't take as long as I thought they would. We missed the month of October in terms of streams just because we were sort of waiting on some things. But now it's December, we basically had monthly streams except missing October. And the goal is to moving forward, try to make streams every other week. And I was going to have a stream last week, it's just that that was the day before my SAT, which we may have a stream about in the future because there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. But yeah, we're gonna like our next stream will probably be the first Friday of January. I'm not sure what day that is, but we will probably have a stream with a secret guest about. Well, we don't know what it is yet because I haven't really discussed with that person. But we're going to be having probably a secret guest interview as our next stream, which will be happening early January. We're probably going to have another stream 2 weeks later, and then the next week will be finals week and the start of a new semester. Hopefully, finals don't get in the way of our streams. I'll try to make sure that everything works out. So that's streams. Another thing is our ice skating social will be next week, Friday, December 17th. That's the Friday before the Friday before winter break, and it's just a really fun way to just chill before you chill even more during the break. It should be the date's a little bit like the time's a little confusing. We'll post on our Instagram more specifically. It looks like it might be from 3 to 5:30, but it could be from 3:30 to 5. And we're still working that out, so please stay posted. Keep your eyes out on Instagram for when we announce it. Also, don't forget that there's a $10 admission fee just for skates, and this is all at the Westminster Ice Rink. Finally, follow us on Twitch, please. Anybody, again, who follows on Twitch before we hit 50 followers will be entered in our giveaway for the exclusive OG hoodie. And yeah, this VOD should end up on YouTube within the coming days, probably by the end of next week. Timestamps should be coming up a couple days after that. That's it for the stream. Any last questions, anybody? I'm sorry the stream felt a little bit more empty. It's just without Vex. There's no chat going on. There's nothing really happening. But yeah. Okay, let's see if I can finalize the time to make sure for this. Okay, yeah, it looks like the ice skating social will be from 3:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. That seems to be established. Okay, it doesn't seem like there's any questions. Thank you so much for everybody who came to the stream. Hope it was enjoyable, or at least educational, or at least endurable. I hope we all have a nice weekend. Hopefully I see you next